Hi, my name is James Garbutt. This is Denny Dumas. Today's video is about buying and selling tenanted properties. And our hope here is to share our experience and advice when it comes to tenanted properties. So the important thing for sellers to know is that tenants have a lot of rights. They have rights. You can't simply evict a tenant because you want to present a property well for a sale. And from a buyer's perspective, we're assuming that you don't want to be a landlord, as often we are dealing with buyers that are trying to occupy the properties that they purchase. So Denny, how about we start from the sales side, the challenges we face?
Yeah, when you're looking to sell a tenanted property, the first thing you're going to want to do is provide your listing agent with a copy of the lease agreement. That's going to let us know if it's on a month-to-month, if it's on a fixed-term lease, what the monthly rent is, what's included in the rent, and those are all details buyers are going to want to know, as well as they're going to want to see that lease agreement. There are a number of challenges that come along with selling tenanted properties. First thing is cleanliness of the unit. In most cases, owners take better care and put more effort into getting a property ready to sell than a tenant would. Availability is a big one. As realtors selling tenanted properties, we're required to give tenants 24 hours notice to show a property. As well, we're kind of working around their schedule to make the selling process as convenient for them as we can. The other thing that can be a challenge, and this is specifically if we're looking at a investor type buyer, if the rent is much lower than market rent, it's going to turn investors away because the cash flow situation doesn't necessarily make sense for them. And an investor type buyer coming into a tenanted property can't evict a tenant just because the monthly rent is not what the market currently can produce for them. As a realtor, it's ultra important, and we take a lot of onus on building a relationship early with the tenant. We often set aside pre-planned showings for the first couple weeks just to give them as much notice as possible. And if there are any showings outside of those times that we pre-plan with them, we're trying to give them as much notice as possible just to make the selling process as easy and smooth as we can for them.
On the buy side, the assumption is you don't want to take over a tenancy. So let's assume a common thing that we run into is a month-to-month tenancy. So if you're a buyer and you want to buy a property and you want vacant possession, you need to state in that offer that you want vacant possession, and you need to give 2 full calendar months notice. So that means that if you buy offer a place on January 1st, those 2 full calendar months would be February and March. So you would want vacant possession for early April. So it's important to note vacant possession at the end of the tenancy term that allows for them to be given proper notice according to the rules. One thing that Denny didn't mention on the sales side, if a place is an absolute mess or a buyer needs a quicker possession and they want it vacant, and in both circumstances we're trying to get the tenant out earlier and be in breach of the contract, of the typical residential tenancy contract, you have the option to sign what's called a mutual agreement to end tenancy. So that means both parties are mutually agreeing to end tenancy. So whenever you're going against the typical rules, you need that signed by the tenant and by the owner. And just as some tips to owners of these properties, bribes go a long way. Sweeten the pot. It's important to note that if you're giving 2 months notice to a tenant, that second month, that last month they're there, is compensated for free. They do not have to pay that rent for the inconvenience of it. So if you're mutually releasing a tenancy earlier, you have at least that amount that you're expected to pay in normal circumstances, and even sweeten the pot more if it helps get your property presenting better or accommodates a great offer. Outside of that, don't forget, buyers, in your offer clauses that you have to put a term that instructs the seller to give eviction notice to the tenant if they're on a month-to-month basis. Because the moment you remove subjects and the deal becomes firm with that deposit in place, at that point in time, the seller needs to give proper written notice to the tenant so that they vacate in 2 calendar months, so you get vacant possession. Can be messy. I don't recommend you do the possession on the first of that month the tenant's out. Do it a week after so that the owners have time to clean up the property, and hopefully they do so. So the other things that I would item, and these are just simple tips from what we've experienced, is that open communication from realtor to tenant. Our goal, open communication well in advance and try to work around their schedule so we don't upset them. sweeten the pot through bribes just to come up with better circumstances to get what you want, because tenants can be difficult at times. And often a tenanted property that is an absolute mess, that is a disaster zone, it is often better to sell it vacant. So whatever that means, whether it's a mutual release, whether it's waiting till the end of a fixed term, whatever that is to get it vacant, it's better to present it vacant and clean than an absolute pigsty. And the only other thing I'm going to mention is, because I get this often a lot, is when you are entering a new tenancy agreement or you're releasing the term. If you have the option to a fixed term and the tenant's on board with vacating at the end of it, great, do that. If it's a fixed term that goes from the month to month, that's the most common thing. But the advice that I would give, we don't know what future markets are going to be like, but in a typical year, April, May, June are pretty good. So if you can have a tenancy term end around March or April, you have the flexibility of having a vacant property at a very sellable time of the year. So that's one of the more common things I recommend to people. If you're going to have a term that ends in November and you want to sell it afterwards, selling in December, you might be leaving some money on the table. That's all I can think of. Denny, anything else?
We covered most of it.
Good luck with buying or selling tenanted properties. That's it. Thanks for watching.